cool cats and kittens. Mr. Hunter here. We're gonna pick up where we left off last time, with our context and with what's going on in American history. Thanks for being here today. Oh, let me fix the camera a little bit. I decided to do these videos instead of live ones just because, yeah, it's easier. Okay, so we talked about the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. You guys learned about Dorothea Lange. You guys learned, and her famous photograph, Migrant Mother. You learned about the causes of the Great Depression, and it's kind of a weird time for American history. So how did America respond? Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes the president, and he offers this New Deal, right? He basically says America deserves a better deal than under Hoover, than this Great Depression crap. So people will seek reprieve from the Great Depression. Duh, the Great Depression was pretty great and depressing, and that's no fun. Yeah, it's obvious. So FDR will promise America a New Deal, like we said, to contrast Hoover's. There are 3 R's, and you need to know these 3 R's. They are relief, recovery, reform. Relief, recovery, and reform. So basically what he promised would be that the government was going to give them temporary immediate relief from the problems associated with the Great Depression. They promised that the United States would recover and they would get back to an economic situation that was beneficial and good for everyone, and that we would reform American policy, the laws, so that way nothing like the Great Depression would ever happen again. Now, as we go through this, I want you to evaluate. How have we done? Have we really reformed? Have we had a Great Depression since? How well did America recover? How well did America provide relief? I want you to kind of evaluate the 3 R's, okay? So, a few more details you need to know. Part of the relief and the recovery effort, let's get this thing going. Part of this relief and recovery, we'll talk about reform later, but relief and recovery, FDR's administration will create what are known as the alphabet soup agencies. This is kind of their nickname. There are so many different, there's dozens of them, and they have names like CCC or the WPA, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the Workmen's, what's the WPA stand for? Workers Program of America? Let me look this up real fast. I can't remember. What does the WPA stand for? Workers Progress Administration. Yeah, so the CCC is Civilian Conservation Corps, and the WPA is Workers Progress Administration. And let me actually show you some more of these alphabet soup agencies. This is what I do normally in class. So if you go to the Wikipedia alphabet agencies, you guys will check this out. There is the AAA, the CCC, the CWDR, SDSH, EBA, FAA, FAP, FAA, FCA, FCC, FDIC, Now, FDIC is still around, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Some of these are still around, actually. Most of them are gone. Tennessee Valley Authority is really important. It brought much needed modern things like electrification to rural parts of Tennessee. It was like kind of a precursor of like infrastructure for poorer communities. Yeah, it was really cool. Anyway, there's a bunch of them. Lots to know. Okay, let's keep going. They are going to have mixed results, okay? And I don't know if you saw on that list, some of them were like for artists. There was a dancers project. There was an artist project that paid artists and dancers to perform. Basically what their idea was is they wanted to, this was some of our early understanding of what's called Keynesian economics, in which Alfred Maynard Keynes said we need to, in order to fix a depression like this or a recession, we need to stimulate the economy. That's an influx, an infusion of capital, right? We need to get people back to work, and the government is a large entity that can do that. So because this was early and because we didn't really understand if this kind of stuff would work, it was kind of a half-hearted attempt. I don't know, maybe a wholehearted attempt, but they didn't put enough cash. Historians and economists will look back on this and say these alphabet soup agencies are going to do a decent job, but they're not going to go enough. They're not going to do enough. They will spend millions of dollars on the problem when they probably needed to spend billions of dollars on the problem. So they will hire people to build buildings, build bridges, paint murals, open parks. They basically, the government was paying people to go back to work. The Hoover Dam was built under this initiative, and Ogden High School. Ogden High School, that you guys know downtown, was the first school in Utah that cost over $1 million. And you're probably thinking, wow, that was a lot of money. And back then it was an enormous amount of money. That's why Ogden is kind of extravagant and opulent. They were looking for excuses. They basically were making things nicer than they probably absolutely had to in order to keep people employed longer, make the job more difficult and a little fancier to keep people employed longer. Unfortunately, like we said, it won't do quite enough. If you're interested in this, I highly recommend you check it out. But it's an interesting initiative. Now we can contrast with this most recent stimulus package, the what is it called, American Families First Act. I don't know. It's just passed. That's the you may have heard about your parents getting their stimulus check in the mail. That was a $2.2 trillion stimulus package. Now, if you contrast that with the stimulus packages after the Great Depression, even after inflation, it is a lot more money. Every American got what, $1,200? What was it? $1,200, and the kids got $500 or something like that. They're even talking about doing another one because they're seeing the impact. After this stimulus checks went out, the stock market went way up and the economy started to move again. And a lot of economists are already thinking that this early action by Congress maybe prevented a pretty bad depression because of the coronavirus. So it's an interesting thing that we are literally watching right now American legislatures make decisions based on lessons learned in American history, such as the Great Depression with FDR. So I think it's very cool. Okay, then the United States, unfortunately, will get pulled into a war. So the World War II lasts from 1939 to 1945, as you see there on the bottom. As soon as that stupid thing moves. America will get involved in 1941, as you guys may know, December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese will attack Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So we've got a couple of pictures here to kind of tell the story. So at first, the United States was trying to remain neutral to Hitler's ambitions in Europe. So remember, Hitler and Germany, well, Germany was treated, some say would be considered to be treated unfairly after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. Germany's economy was in the pooper, and Adolf Hitler was able to consolidate power. That's another story. And they started basically expanding again. They said they needed to expand for what they called pan-Germanism, or what they referred to as Lebensraum, which is living space. This idea that Germany was actually a bigger country, that they had been artificially shrunk, and that they needed to expand. So they were not conquering, they were just expanding to their normal country size. Either way, Europe is like, Hitler's doing some crazy stuff, and the United States, here we have, is trying to remain neutral, but what's tugging on the beard of Uncle Sam here, what's pulling us in, is aid. We are giving millions and millions of dollars of weapons and food to the Allied forces, to the British and to the French, to fight Hitler. So some historians say that the United States was never really neutral in World War II. We were always an ally. We were just a non-combatant. We were always part of the Allied forces. Well, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, things change. And we go, that's dumb, and we will immediately declare war on Japan, and then by default, declare war on Germany. And the war, really ugly, lots of bad things happen. And eventually the United States and England and France, well, not really France much at this point, but the United States and Canada and Britain will launch what's called Operation Overlord, known as the D-Day invasion of Normandy, France, in which thousands of American and British troops will storm the beaches of France, of Normandy, caught the Germans unawares. They weren't quite defended as well as they could have been, and they will eventually start. That is the beginning of the end of Germany's control in Europe. And then in Japan, the war is really a strange war. The Americans will practice something called island hop. We're going to practice something called island hopping, island to island, to try to restrict Japan's control over the territory of the Pacific. And this is from the Battle of Iwo Jima, where Americans will finally take the hill, take the highest mountain in Iwo Jima, the last stand, or the last holdout of the Japanese forces there. Really ugly. And then, of course, as you guys know, let's talk some more important things. We'll get to we're going to talk about Midway and Rosie and internment and Nuremberg. Oh, interesting. Okay, we got lots of cool stuff to talk about. Sorry, I forgot what we were going to cover. Okay, so after the war, FDR, still the president, will begin something called the Lend-Lease Act, which basically allows the United States to loan millions of dollars of aid to European countries to help them rebuild. This will even sorry. No, I'm thinking of the Marshall Plan. My bad. Lend-Lease Act. Cancel that. Scratch. I don't want to start the video over. I'm thinking of the Marshall Plan. Lend-Lease Act is basically us giving that aid, like I already told you from this picture. My bad. Okay, so I was like, wait, we're in 1939 here. Got ahead of myself. So a quick overview of the war. Germany will invade Poland, again, for Lebensraum, right? To expand. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, right? D-Day, take France. We already talked about this. The Battle of the Bulge. It's called the Battle of the Bulge because they will make a bulge into the western front. The Germans will push in and bulge out the front, the line, in which Germany tries to break the Allied forces moving through France. They will fail, but it was close, and we basically will take France. And then the Russians will move in on the east, eventually surrounding Berlin, and the war will end in Europe. Iwo Jima, we already talked about. Truman will drop the A-bomb, the atom bomb. It is debated on whether or not that was a necessary act. We know it happened. The idea was that if we kill a bunch of Japanese, we can avoid the deaths of American troops by kind of terrorizing the Japanese into submission. Yeah, it's interesting. It's coming under more and more scrutiny now as we get further and further from the war by historians. There lots and lots of people were involved in the war. If you're interested, look up the Navajo Code Talkers. The Navajo language is one of the hardest languages in the whole world, probably considered the hardest, and the Germans couldn't break it. So we would use Navajo radio men to talk to each other over the radio. So you'd have one Navajo at base, one Navajo out with the battalion, and they would speak, and then the Germans would hear it, right? They would be on the same frequency, but they couldn't speak Navajo. We had a lot of black Americans serving in World War II with the Tuskegee Airmen as well. Lots and lots of new technology during World War II. Radar, sonar, microwaves will be developed during this time period, and computers will be first used at the end of the war. Okay, the Battle of Midway. This will be the turning point in the East. Here's some American propaganda for you, where you see the Japanese, right, depicted here in kind of this racist depiction, are being crushed by the Midway Tide Stick. They're being finally destroyed. Okay, the Japanese fail to detect U.S. planes and aircraft carriers, which will allow us to basically take Midway, which is a very important strategic island for control over the Pacific, and Japan will basically lose the majority of their fleet, and from that point they're just going to turtle up and stay on the islands that they have, and that's why we were tempted to drop the bomb. Okay, back home. Men are off fighting the war, and women will move into the workplace like never before. So we've got this famous propaganda poster called Rosie the Riveter, where basically it's encouraging women to go to work, and women will be asked to go back home in the 1950s. And as you can imagine, a lot of these women didn't want to, and it will forever change the dynamic of the family in the United States. Women will gain a lot more freedoms and a lot more rights to be able to work if they so choose. Okay, during the war with the Japanese, there are thousands and thousands of Japanese Americans who will be interned. This is kind of a juicy debate. In 1983, the United States will pay $20,000 to all of the Japanese families that were forced interned. Now, and here's why: these are American citizens; they have rights. We determined that in 1983 that we violated their rights to false imprisonment and their rights to not be imprisoned without being tried for a crime. As you guys know, those are constitutionally protected rights. And it was called Korematsu versus the United States Supreme Court. But basically, as much as we've learned that this was wrong and we shouldn't do that, if you're alive during that time period and you question, are these people loyal to the United States or are they loyal to Japan? Obviously, they were loyal to the United States. In fact, there were thousands of Japanese who served in the war. So America was a little bit scared, a little bit skittish, a little schizoid about our relationship with Japanese Americans. As you know, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, it was very traumatizing to a lot of Americans. So I don't want you guys to walk away from this being like, oh, we're the worst, Americans suck, and we're racist, awful terribles. We definitely made a mistake. We should not have violated these people's constitutional rights. But if you were alive during the time and you had an uncle at Pearl Harbor who was killed in that sneak attack by the Japanese, I don't know how well you could have resisted the temptation to be a little racist. It's hard. It's hard for us to remember, guys. We're gonna try to not to look back on these people and look down on them and judge them. We have to remember during that time they were operating from a place of fear. It doesn't excuse them, but it definitely helps you understand and how we might prevent these things moving forward. You guys may have heard after 9/11 there was a lot of really prejudiced things towards Muslim Americans, and it wasn't as bad though. Like we didn't throw them in camps, we didn't do as many terrible things. So maybe we learned our lesson. I don't know. Either way, if you're interested, I have a lot of books in my classroom you can borrow about this. It's a really interesting time. One of these camps was actually in Utah at a place called Topaz Mountain. So if you're interested, check it out. The Nuremberg trial. So after the war, the many Nazis will be put on trial. but only 20 of them will be put on trial for the Holocaust, which was the systematic execution of 6 million Jewish people, which you guys probably have learned about in other circumstances in your English classes. We're not going to get into it in this class because it's kind of juicy, but understand that the Nazis will target the Jews and systematically destroy them because of their ethnicity. It's called a genocide. And these people were put on trial for what they've done. Many will get the death sentence. Many will flee and hide. Some say the Nuremberg trials were not really the most just trial, that they didn't really get what they deserved. If you're interested, you can look more into it. I wanted you to be familiar with it, though. Okay? Okay, now we're going to get to our next unit, the Cold War. You guys are going to be completing an actively learn module, the overview of the Cold War and what it was. But I want to set the stage for you, okay? So essentially, what happens is after the war is over, the United States will engage in what's called the Marshall Plan, where we will give money. This is what I got confused with earlier. We will give money to European nations to help them rebuild from the damage and destruction occurred. Well, what happens is the Soviet Union, who was led by one Joseph Stalin, does not like the West. They don't like democracy. They don't like capitalism. They are going to try to shut themselves away. And they're going to have their own plan to give aid to European nations to try to help them rebuild. So what you're going to see is the Europe especially, but the entire world is going to kind of fall under two camps. They're called the East and the West. Those who are loyal to the Soviet Union and those who are loyal to the United States and the West, and Britain and France, of course, as well. The idea is that the Soviet Union, because of their agenda, and if you have learned about the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, their communist revolution, their goal was not just to have communism in Russia, but to expand communism to the rest of the world. And the United States did not want that. The United States will engage in a policy of what we call containment for the next 40 years. As you can see here, it's 1947 at the end of the war, really, 1945 you could say, all the way to 1991 when the Soviet Union will end. And the Truman Doctrine, which we're going to learn more about later, says that the United States will interfere in any country that is at risk or is being threatened by communism. This will motivate our involvement in the Korean War and the war in Vietnam. So this is a really important thing that you need to understand. And I'm going to get into this more in the next video, but I kind of wanted to set the stage that the tension of World War II, where we have the powerful Soviets to the east and the powerful Americans to the west, and their conflicting political aims will create the circumstances that will become the Cold War. Okay? Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you watching this video. Make some good choices in your life and fill out the note catcher that went with this video. You can obviously rewind it and watch it again. You dope. Catch you later. Bye.